Thanks everyone for joining to talk about OTIF compliance. We're here to help you understand all of the compliance requirements, best practices to reduce those fines, and any kind of insights and nuances that exist all over the place within the OTIF world. So we will start to dive in. Just real quick to cover the basics. OTIF is Walmart's kind of supply chain performance program where they're measuring your performance against their kind of key KPIs to make sure that, product is being received on time and in full so that they can keep their, shelves stocked. So that's the major goal. And of course, if you're not performing up to their standards, you get those OTIF fines, which are calculated by taking 3% of any non-compliant goods. If you fall below the monthly threshold, we'll talk about all of that. And as well as sort of how you define on time and in full. So in terms of who this affects, if you ship product to Walmart DCs that ultimately then go on to the stores, or if you're an e-commerce supplier and Walmart fulfills products on walmart.com, then you're also affected by this OTIF program. There's other types of suppliers that are not impacted by this OTIF program, including Sam's, DSD, direct import, international. And if you are a DSV vendor, dropship vendor, where you're fulfilling individual customer orders on walmart.com yourself, you would not be beholden to these OTIF requirements. I will say Sam's Club and Walmart International, they do have OTIF programs, but the rules are a little bit different. They tend to not give out fines, at least with Sam's Club. So different rules, different sort of fine scenarios. So we don't focus on that. But just wanted to call out, they do have some OTIF-like programs. So starting with kind of diving into what does it mean to be on time. So this would be the OT out of the OTIF acronym. So again, Walmart's trying to make sure they have products when they need it, so they can keep their shelves stocked. So this requirement varies whether you're prepaid or collect. If you're prepaid, then you're measured by your ability to get the product to Walmart's DC within that must arrive by date window. Sometimes that's a single day. Sometimes that window can be several days. We'll talk about that. But if you're prepaid, where you manage the transportation, it's all about the goods being delivered to Walmart on time. And the goal is 98% of goods within a month are considered on time. For collect suppliers, where Walmart comes and picks up the product from your warehouses, the requirements are a little bit different. There's 2 steps you have to do to be considered compliant. And the first of those is whenever Walmart submits a purchase order to you, in general, you must sort of process that PO and route it by 4 p.m. Central Time the following day. So that's your sort of clock or deadline that covers, that includes weekends, holidays. Most of the time, we'll talk about a way to avoid holiday charges. But that's the general requirement. There's some nuance there, but that's the high level is you need to route your orders by 4 p.m. the next day to sort of schedule that pickup. And then the second step is when Walmart's truck is coming to pick up that product, that the warehouse is, open and has that PO ready to be picked up in a timely manner. And so that's the second part of the requirement, is actually being available to have that PO picked up at the scheduled time. And the goal, just like for prepaid, is 98% of the goods meet both of those requirements on collect. And then the other side of the coin, in full. So A PO would be considered completely in full if everything that Walmart ordered on that PO was actually delivered. If they received all the cases for that order, and that would be considered in full. And the goal for all departments, all suppliers is 98%. So essentially that means out of all the goods ordered for a month, they expect 98% of them to be filled. And that's the requirement. If you finish below that, then you can get fines. There are some ways to cancel certain POs or edit order quantities and kind of some nuance to these rules, but in general, that's the requirement for all POs. All right, and just a couple of slides here to call out overages, because when we start talking about shortages or not in full, overages is kind of a something that gets brought up a lot. So just want to call out sort of some side effects of shortages and not in full. So sometimes there are these overages called billable overages where you may have accidentally sent too much product on an order. I know that's probably rare, but it's possible. The other thing is Walmart may have misreceived and they pulled in, some cases under PO number 2 instead of PO number 1 that it was actually part of. And so that kind of scenario can cause an overage on a PO. And in these cases, we are talking about billable overages because there's actually an opportunity to invoice Walmart for these additional goods so that you can get paid for them. So that's kind of what we describe as a billable overage. They're also on the SQEP, the SQEP compliance program. There are SQEP overage fines where if Walmart believes they've received an excess of goods, according to what was said to be shipped, then they can actually fine you for that overage. So a lot of different ways to get impacted by the receiving process. Sometimes these are valid, sometimes they're invalid and not your fault and sort of a Walmart receiving issue. And so this kind of root cause kind of covers that. So, again, if you actually overshipped, then that would be potentially like a true overage. You may get a fine for that. You also may be able to bill Walmart for those additional goods. The second shortage triggered overages are more where it's a Walmart misreceiving, where they may mix up across POs. Sometimes they also mix up within a PO and kind of receive in cases of one item as a different item on that PO. And so you could have an item that's short and an item that's over on the same PO. So all of that can kind of play a factor in this whole receiving game of shortages and overages. Just want to talk about some common scenarios there. So OTIF fines and other revenue loss can all kind of add up or stack up. And that's what we call it out here. Just a reminder that it's a tough game sometimes with this chargeback deductions, compliance requirements. So, we see instances where a single PO may have an AP shortage deduction. It could have a not in full fine on the OTIF side. Then you could even have the possibility of an SQEP fine as well, all on the same PO. So it's really important to keep an eye on these various causes of revenue loss so that you can understand, where you're losing money and hopefully what you can do to prevent it going forward. All right, so want to dig into some OTIF root causes. So I know this is a 201 course. I feel like this is the heart of the issue here, and what we're trying to portray is to give you some insights as to, why are these OTIF fines happening and what you could possibly do to prevent them. So just to start out, for prepaid on time, so if you're a prepaid supplier, again, you're required to deliver those cases to the DC on time. And Walmart, unlike some retailers, will fine you if you're early. as well as if you're late, or if you were to deliver without an appointment. So any three of those scenarios can cause you to be not on time, and where you're liable for fines. And so again, I talked about what is on time. It's defined by the must arrive by window. We have a slide that'll talk about those different windows and what defines your window. It's important to know that, but we'll dive deeper into that shortly. On the collect side, again, this kind of reiterates what we spoke to earlier. You must confirm or route that PO by 4 p.m. Central the day after Walmart transmits the order to you. So the clock starts as soon as they send you that EDI, the purchase order, and you've got to 4 p.m. the next day, regardless if it's a weekend or weekday. And then the second part is obviously when they come to pick up the freight at the scheduled time, that PO is available to be picked up. So that's collect ready. In full side, common root causes. Obviously, if Walmart doesn't receive everything that they ordered, then that's going to cause a not in full scenario. Or, if nothing is shipped at all, then obviously that would cause a not in full fine too. And just a call out, and we'll talk more about this as well, but even if you cancel a PO or cancel a PO line, you're basically telling Walmart, I'm not shipping this product, but Walmart will still fine you for in full charges, even if you tell them you've canceled it. But there's a way to avoid the fine depending on how you cancel. So we'll dive into that, but just want to call out that even if you're canceling, which they want you to do, you can still receive this in full fine. So some ways to try to sort of best practices to be in full, to be prepaid on time, collect ready. We'll dive into that. So obviously for in full, you want to have an idea of what Walmart plans to order, sort of that demand planning, so that you can do your supply plans to make sure you have enough inventory to fulfill all of these orders. Obviously, it's a tough challenge. The goalposts sort of constantly move as Walmart updates their forecast, but it's definitely something you have to be, focused on to try to have enough inventory to fill their orders. So of course, as things change, you want to be able to adapt so that you can fulfill. And then a couple of these last points here, packaging. So if I mentioned earlier how Walmart can kind of mix up either goods within a PO or even goods across POs. And so this can happen, especially if you have multiple POs on the same truck. Or if you have items that are very similar to each other in terms of your packaging. Some of the receiving that Walmart does is still manual at their DCs. And so that means people are counting and identifying boxes. And so there is that chance of human error. So if you can make sure that your packaging per item and per PO is, separate and distinguishable, it's kind of a best practice. We know packaging is very costly, and especially making changes to packaging, but it's at least something to be considerate of as you're making packaging changes. You want to make it as easy as possible for Walmart to receive properly to avoid any kind of invalid fines and deductions. And lastly, we'll dive into this more deeply, but when you are canceling, you supply a reason code for the cancellation. And there's a list of reason codes to pick from. And some of them will leave the accountability on you, where you get the fine, even though you canceled it. And then some of those cancellation reasons, Walmart will accept the accountability for and will not hold you accountable for those canceled cases, and you won't get fined for them. So whenever possible, you want to use a Walmart reason code to avoid the accountability and avoid the fine. And we'll talk about those a little later. So lastly, prepaid and collect on more on the on-time side. So if you're prepaid, you definitely want to know your delivery window. You know, if you have a 1 day window versus up to a 4 day window, your strategy might be a little bit different. You know, obviously with 1 day, you've got to be there on that day to hit the requirement. If you have a 4 day window, you know, for one, you might not want to aim for the last day of the window because you don't give yourself any sort of buffer on the late side. If you're late by 1 day, all of a sudden now you're late. But when you have a 4 day window, maybe you aim for the middle of that window so that you have a little bit more of a buffer. So delivery windows can affect your strategy to be on time. And of course, it's crucial that your third parties you're working with, your transportation team internally, that they all understand the delivery requirements, and the impact if they don't hit that goal. And we'll talk about sort of sharing outcomes and performance later, but it's important everybody knows what the requirements are. Of course, this is something you're doing all the time. Every PO's got to be in that must arrive by delivery window. Right now, Walmart's requiring it at 98% of the time. So you really want a consistent process to communicate the requirements, to hit that MABD window and adapt and monitor performance when you're not. Ideally, and most suppliers, if you're prepaid, use a mix of a fleet. And so you may use multiple carriers, and every carrier is not built the same. So you may have some poorer performers and you may have some top performers. With Walmart's OTIF program, you're going to see your overall on-time number, but really you need to be looking at each carrier that's moving freight within your supply chain so that you can evaluate each of them and call out those poor performers, highlight gaps in performance so that you can bring them up, versus just having that general on-time percentage that doesn't really tell you who's impacting that the most. And so once you can track that data by third party, then that's when you get into sharing that performance with them to drive improvements. On the collect side, so of course you want to have that process of we received Walmart purchase orders and now we've got to route these by 4 p.m. the next day. So there should be a team that's very aware of that time requirement and the process to submit those routing requests on time. And if you schedule a pickup and Walmart's trucks do not arrive, which does happen, of course, the process they prescribe to suppliers is to fill out a transportation portal ticket to basically notify Walmart that a truck has not arrived. And so that's their suggested practice for notifying Walmart when this happens. It's also good sort of paper backup of what happened, because you may be at risk for a fine, but in this case, it's not your fault, it's Walmart's fault. So it's important to follow that process to create paperwork, and it's Walmart's sort of recommended action when that happens. And so ideally you can follow that as well. Something else that I kind of briefly touched on earlier, holidays. So hopefully in your organization, you all get holidays off from time to time. And that means, when you have the first requirement of when Walmart sends the PO and you got till the next day to route it, well, what happens when that falls on a holiday? Walmart by default won't care. They'll fine you for it, whether it's Christmas, New Year's, or whatever. So to try to prevent that scenario, Walmart requests you to fill out a supplier closing template every quarter, and you're basically notifying Walmart of the days you'll be closed and that you do not wish to receive orders on. And you can, then adjust what day you actually want to receive the order on. so that you can plan for that kind of holiday outage. And so that will help you prevent those fines. This happens quite a bit. I've seen a lot of suppliers where you look at these late routing is this specific charge type in collect ready when you don't route on time. And so often we look at the order date and it's right around the holiday. So you can help prevent that if you're filling out those closing templates and telling Walmart in advance, don't send me orders on these days, we're going to be closed. Lastly, kind of related to missed pickups on the Walmart side, you also have an ability to see what carriers are coming to pick up goods in the data. And one thing we've suggested as well, if you continually have a carrier or two that Walmart is using and sending to your facility and is failing to arrive on time, it may be helpful to have a conversation with your replenishment manager or your supplier solutions manager about that scenario to see if they can, either fix it or potentially give you a different carrier, because Walmart works with a number of carriers. And if one is not working, then hopefully they can find a one that will arrive on time. So, consider when you need to escalate, when you are really having this problem of missed pickups frequently, is that can cause you to receive invalid fines. And obviously, you don't want to have that. So consider kind of escalating when you see that pattern quite a bit. All right. And so hopefully you guys have an idea of this already, but difference in prepaid and collect. With prepaid, you're managing the freight, you pay for the freight, and you schedule the pickups, you tell the carriers what date to deliver on, where it needs to be shipped, all of that. So you're doing all the transportation for prepaid. And I mentioned delivery windows. So this is kind of the mix of delivery windows that you may have as a prepaid supplier. You can find this in your OTIF scorecard data and retail link. You can see what your delivery window has been on past POs. But there is kind of a mapping in what determines your window. So if depending on whether you're sort of have live unloads where the truck is being unloaded with the driver there as soon as they arrive, that would be a live unload. Or if it's a drop trailer where the truck is arriving and leaving the trailer behind, sometimes with the drop you can get a larger window. So that's where you see that last column saying MABD -2, -3. That basically means you'd have the MABD date and 3 days preceding that MABD. So you can get up to a 4-day window with the last day of the window being the MABD date on the PO. So the mode, whether it's LTL or truckload, sort of the type of goods, if it's a high velocity DC or perishable, that impacts versus the other types of DCs. So all of that plays into the sort of rules of how your window is determined. But you can also specifically look in the OTIF scorecard PO data for that window, and you can see what yours is, which I highly recommend if you don't know it. So working with your prepaid data, talked about evaluating performance by carrier. So here are some suggestions on how specifically to accomplish this in Retail Link. So when you're looking at your OTIF PO or PO line data, there should be a carrier column. So obviously that would be helpful to identifying the carrier that picked up that PO or that delivered it. And then once you have the carrier identified, you can use filters or pivot tables and kind of do this math of calculating an on-time score by carrier. So the way that you could do that would be to take the number of on-time cases over sort of the total number of cases delivered. And Walmart doesn't, you could use the I believe there's a received column, or you can kind of use these columns we've laid out to add up the early cases plus the late plus the unscheduled plus the on time to get the full kind of denominator. And so that formula would give you an on-time score per carrier, and you would obviously add it up across all the POs. Highly recommend to do this because otherwise you just kind of have this overall on-time score and you're not sure, which carriers are worse or better and which ones you need to, call and get on the phone ASAP. So this is a way to calculate those scores by carrier. And as we talked about, you may need to pick up the phone. You may need to email some reports. One thing that we believe is really helpful is to share data and really show them the problem. So sharing a list of all the POs that are late or early can help them sort of see the impact of the problem. You could also if it's past months, you could include the fines associated with those POs. Or if it's a month that has not yet been fined, you can take the supplier affected COGS, take 3% of that, and that's kind of your projected fine. So you can also show them in real time what's projected to give them a recent snapshot of poor performance or POs that didn't meet the requirements and like the dollar impact on those POs. So, once you share that data, that hopefully starts the conversation of how can we fix this, because these POs that are not compliant are costing us money, and that carrier should be motivated to perform better for you and help you avoid those fines. So that is kind of a way to monitor, to share the impact, and then ideally you're continuing to monitor as you hopefully make changes to improve scores. And you can continue to monitor and make sure those changes are actually taking impact and continue to communicate. So, your score starts anew every month. So it is kind of something that hopefully you can create a efficient process to monitor and share performance and improve over time. So, and as just some follow-up questions that you may want to talk about with the carrier, is the issue seeming to be late or early? Is the carrier given enough lead time to actually get it to the DC on time? Hopefully the carrier can kind of help you identify that. Another thing we look at is, when was the appointment scheduled? If the appointment was scheduled within the MABD window, but the carrier didn't hit that appointment, a lot of times that's a sign that the carrier, was just late for whatever reason. So it can be helpful to identify that difference between appointment and actual arrival, because that could give you an idea, is the carrier hitting their target or not? And of course, there may be extenuating circumstances, weather or other things that could impact the truck. But, you don't necessarily know that unless you share the data and ask and kind of work with your third parties to improve. All right, so on the collect side, again, Walmart handles the transportation for collect suppliers. They come and pick up the freight at your facilities. You're not required for that PO to arrive at the DC within the must arrive by date. That's a difference in collect and prepaid. You're not required to hit that MABD, but you are required to, confirm and route the PO by 4 p.m. the next day, and to actually have the goods available for pickup when the Walmart carrier shows up. So that is collect. Walmart's taking care of the transportation. If you have third-party warehouses or logistics companies that you're working with, then there are some causes that we've seen that you may want to consider if you're having collect-ready performance issues. So one of those on the collect-ready side, one issue you can receive is called supplier ship point. It's one of the least common OTIF compliance issues, but it does happen. And what it basically means is Walmart tried to pick up the PO, but it was not ready, i.e. they went to the ship point and they were not able to pick it up. So if this is happening to you, and you do have third-party warehouses or even just warehouses of your own with different teams, then it can be helpful to kind of share that list of POs where Walmart is blaming and even potentially fining you for supplier ship point for saying that the product was not ready. So you can start that conversation by saying, here's the list of POs where Walmart was unable to pick up. So again, that can happen by kind of exporting the data out of that OTIF scorecard app and Retail Link, and sharing the list of POs that had supplier ship point so that you can start the conversation and try to figure out what happened on these POs. Was it truly our fault? Do we need to make a process change here to avoid this going forward? So that is kind of a common scenario with supplier ship point. For not in full cases that were not canceled, that's kind of how we think about it. If you cancel a PO, you still may receive not in full charges, but that's somewhat expected. You didn't ship, i.e. canceled, but if you didn't cancel it and you still got a not in full charge, then it's a little bit more of an investigation of why didn't Walmart receive all of the cases. And maybe you were supposed to cancel and it didn't get done, or maybe there's an issue at the warehouse that would explain why those cases did not get shipped out. So some questions, you could ask are, is there any picking and packing issues? Do you have enough supply to fill these orders? Is Walmart no showing on pickups? And all of those can kind of come into play. And these last few ones are a little bit more related to the collect ready side, like are they submitting tickets if Walmart's truck didn't show up? So this is kind of questions for in full or collect ready issues that you could ask that warehouse. But again, it's helpful to share the data, and just make sure you understand why you got that fine. And then you can talk about what can we do to prevent that going forward. All right, so doing a little time check. Looks like we're okay. So we'll talk about cancel reason codes next. We've kind of foreshadowed this. All right, so sometimes there are issues where you need to cancel or edit a PO. And when you do that, the reason that you choose can make a big impact as to whether you get a fine or not. So you want to pay close attention to the codes or the reason codes that you use when canceling or editing. And sometimes team members are just not aware that the reason matters, because when Walmart presents these reasons to be picked, they don't tell you these are the reasons that are going to let you avoid the fine, and these are the reasons where you're going to get fined. It's just one long list to pick from. And so it's easy to just find one in the list that sounds good, pick it, and move on. So if you have teams or people that are doing this process of editing or canceling POs, it's really important that they know these rules and they know the kind of repercussions of if you don't choose one of these codes, you will get those fines. So we're going to dig a little bit deeper into that here shortly, but I do want to real quick talk about how you can track your PO data in Retail Link. And this is a great way to see the reason codes that you've been picked, that your people have been picking on POs. So first of all, when you go into the OTIF scorecard, this is what the app looks like in Retail Link. On the left side, there's kind of those icons to choose. And the second icon is where you can see detailed PO data. So you want to choose that tab, that icon, just as our arrow here shows, click to access PO data. And then you've got a couple of different tabs. You have line level, receiver data, They're all data around POs. If you need to get to item information, then you can look at line level. And really, if you're digging into in full issues, line level is really important because it helps you identify which items are not being filled. Whereas if you're looking at on time or collect ready issues, receiver tab is maybe more helpful because those issues are often more at the PO level rather than the item level. So lastly, an important part is how to download this data. So in that top right corner, you can click the download icon to download all your PO data into Excel. And then, that's where you can filter and highlight issues and then share that data with, third parties, other team members, et cetera, so that you can highlight all these issues we've been talking about. Another quick call out in that sort of right side, you've got an option to update the columns that you want to include. You probably will have to do this if you haven't gone into this app before because their default columns are usually a little bit lacking. So within this menu here, you can choose all of the columns that you want to include, things like the carrier or your ship point or the number of cases that were late or early, et cetera. There's a lot of different columns in there to help you understand, what happened on these POs. So, and in this PO details, we're talking about cancellations and edits. In that sort of where we were looking, some of those columns will identify if a PO was edited or canceled. And there's also fields for reason codes. So within that sort of table of data, this is where you can start to dig into your own data to better understand, what are my people using for edits or cancellations. So the, PO edit flag is, if that is true, then that basically means someone edited the entire PO, whereas there's a PO line edit flag, which would mean there was an edit only on that one line. So that's kind of the difference there. And each of those then has a column for the reason code, either the PO edit reason code or the PO line edit reason code. And so that's really what you'll want to look at to determine what code you're using and where the accountability may fall. We've got a table of reason codes where we're going to show you the accountability per code here shortly. But just to sort of reaffirm the process of canceling or editing, typically that's done in Nova. So if you have a team that is making cancellations or edits, they're typically doing that in Nova. And again, they may just be selecting from a drop down. There, in our experience, does not seem to be any indicator whether something is Walmart accountability or supplier accountability. So they're just picking from a list. And like the most common one that we see for cancel POs is supplier does not have product. It's a very simple thing to choose to say, I don't have the product. But it's a guarantee if you choose that reason, you get the accountability. And so it's definitely helpful to look at these other reasons, especially that are assigned to Walmart, and see if one of them may apply and that you can use one of them. So this is exactly sort of what I'm talking about. If you cancel a PO and you choose one of the reasons that apply to supplier accountability, then it's going to be labeled as not in full. And that will impact that in full score and potentially bring you below 98% and then potentially cause a fine related to that PO's cases that were not filled. So that is a common scenario where you have the accountability. The other side, if you choose a reason code where Walmart owns the accountability, then you will avoid a fine and you'll avoid your in full score being affected, especially the supplier in full score. Walmart will still share the overall in full score, but they'll basically exclude the cases with Walmart accountability when they give you your final score and assess fines. So it takes those cases out of the equation that matters to you, and matters in terms of what kind of fines you get. A key asterisk here is whatever reason code. If you pick a Walmart reason code, Walmart does have to approve it. A lot of times that's a replenishment manager reviewing those. And so you may have mixed success with this strategy. Obviously, you don't just want to pick any random Walmart reason code. Ideally, you'd have a justification to explain why you picked that. Sometimes things are related to forecast, or sometimes things maybe like system issues where there's an error kind of in the PO data. So there are different examples of Walmart reason codes that we can look at. But if there's any way you can sort of make your case as to why you picked that, then pick it. And the worst case is they sort of reject that reason code and you don't get sort of out of responsibility for that one PO. But we definitely see Walmart accountability being accepted on POs. So we know sometimes those are getting accepted and you can avoid the accountability and fine for that scenario. So as promised, a list of reason codes. And a lot of times some of these will apply both to edits and cancellations. So I won't necessarily call it every single reason. We got a couple more slides with these, but that top one, like I said, is probably the most common reason we see, no product availability. And that far right column shows you the accountability owner. And so that is going to always kind of fall on the supplier side. So other things, item setup issue, that's going to also be supplier accountability. If you pick a transportation issue prepaid, that's also supplier accountability, because as a prepaid supplier, you're responsible for the transportation. So you unfortunately cannot sort of avoid accountability if it's a prepaid transportation issue. Some other reason codes that actually fall on the Walmart side. So weather, natural disaster, kind of a timely one, maybe. We've had a lot of winter storms. And so when there's truly weather events that are impacting your inventory availability or ability to deliver on time, then you can use this. During COVID, Walmart suggested suppliers use this reason a lot when canceling, just to kind of cover the sort of the pandemic. So we've seen weather, natural disaster used at different times, and it certainly applies as we have weather events in certain cases. So other things I mentioned, like system issues, or if the PO was written incorrectly. There's also a scenario where if an item is end of lifing and you're no longer sort of fulfilling that, then that is another option to choose and kind of avoid some accountability if that is the scenario you're in. And then transportation issue, if you're a collect supplier, then you can kind of use that if, there's some scenarios where Walmart's not picking up freight. You are able to kind of use some of those reasons to pick that option and avoid accountability. Again, other things where the PO was written wrong, like the MABD. So again, these are all Walmart reason codes. You can kind of read these descriptions on this slide deck and, share that to your team members that are reviewing POs that either need to be canceled, or if you're editing the must arrive by date, or if you're editing the quantity ordered, then in all those cases, you're going to pick a reason. And these reasons are handy to know which ones fall on Walmart, which ones fall on you. And if you can justify using any of these Walmart reasons, please do so, because it can help you avoid those fines. And as mentioned, sort of quantity edit scenarios. So not only you may be canceling orders, but sometimes you may just need to modify the ordered quantity. So we wanted to talk about a couple of scenarios. So if Walmart receives 100 cases, but you adjusted the order quantity to be 300, the original quantity is 250. So what would happen is they would just grade you on the original quantity, and that is sort of what they'll do on any system order, as well as the fact of which one is lesser. So if you adjust it to be greater than the original quantity, you get graded on that the one that's more minimal. So original will come into play there. And then another scenario here where the adjusted quantity is 200 and the original quantity is 250, then it should be based on which one is lesser. I do believe it's also going to look at the reason code when you made that edit quantity happen. So I know it's not on this slide, but I think it's also dependent on using a Walmart edit reason as well as to kind of whether they'll use that adjustment. So just want to call that out. Yeah, and here's a call out for that. So the first bullet point on system POs, if the Walmart reason code was used to adjust the MABD, then you can use that adjusted MABD. Otherwise, it's always going to be the original. So that's how system POs work. When you edit the MABD and use a Walmart reason code, then they'll accept your adjustment. If you use a supplier reason code, then you're still going to be held to the original MABD. And sort of second bullet point here on the fun set of infinite rules with Walmart. If it is a manual order, then they'll accept your adjustments. So if it's an SSO or an order you write manually, then they'll accept your adjustments as long as you make that adjustment before the due date. So if it's manual, you have leeway to make changes, and we would highly recommend it because you can hopefully pretty much always avoid on-time issues on manual orders because you can always adjust it before the due date. So if you see manual orders with on-time issues, it's definitely something you should look at as, hey, we could be editing this MABD to actually move it to when we're going to deliver so we can be considered on time. All right. And I think we got 5 or 6 minutes, Peter, for questions. So pretty good timing. Happy to discuss any questions you guys have.
Yep. We don't have any questions in the Q&A yet. So I think that we can just go right over to the next couple slides and have our emails up there. Well, first, do a little shout out for Supplier Wiki. If this is the sort of content that you would like to see more of, we have a bunch of other resources, articles, ebooks, and things like that we recommend. Here are some that are kind of more closely related to our subject today: OTIF and compliance stuff, a little bit of kind of logistics thrown in there too. So that's all great. You may want to get down our emails too, just in case you don't have any questions right now. If something comes up, feel free to send us an email. Of course, send me an email if you have any if you have any recommendations for more content or other kind of areas that you'd like for us to explore. That is what I do. So I love to receive those messages from people who are actual boots on the ground suppliers and controllers and folks like that. So, but yeah, that's that. Now I think we're going to transition over into a little bit of a product preview. So, of course, if you want to hop off, that's totally fine too. But if you want to see a little bit more about what we have to offer, our compliance solution, Ryan can show us a little bit about that too.
So we'll dive right into our compliance solution, and we do have solutions geared towards Walmart's OTIF program as well as their SQEP program. We'll try to hit the highlights here. But within SupplyPike's compliance app, we have this dashboard for giving you visibility to trends over time, to see where you're getting invoices, to see your scores over time with detail. All of this is sort of exportable. You can break it down by department, or 9-digit vendor number. You can switch between your stores, e-com data. You can select multiple months at a time to sort of see, longer term scores and averages, or dive into specific weeks or months to kind of understand what has happened for whatever time period you need to. So on this page, you'll see the full breakdown of kind of your scores and the number of cases that met compliance. Something we do as well is if this is a month like December that's not yet been invoiced by Walmart, you can see your live score and your live kind of projection of what fines you would receive if these scores are final. So we keep track week by week of all the changes, not only the new week that's published, but past weeks that get modified by Walmart. And then a full kind of breakdown of accountability, how much is early or late or unscheduled. And so this dashboard has lots of different reports as well, but meant to give you that high level view. We also have a kind of detailed orders page to view all of your POs for a time period. You can see which ones are not compliant per metric. We also have integrations with High Radius where you would dispute these fines. So you can dispute out of our app as well. Kind of give you an idea of that. If we look at one of these months that has been invoiced, we can see if you've disputed it. We have recommendations on when to dispute to kind of maximize your dispute recovery. And even if you are not disputing, there's still a ton of visibility here to understand exactly what happened on each PO, early, late, your must arrive by window, when you actually arrived, appointment information, carrier, type of delivery, all of that. Something we do on the in-full side, we also bring in your ASN data so you can compare how many cases you say you shipped per PO. And then we'll even look at other sources for cases received. Right now we use DSS for that, but we'll be transitioning to a different data source when DSS sunsets. So we cross-check basically all these receiving and shipped quantities to give you a full picture of what was shipped, what was received, maybe when Walmart's data is potentially wrong, and highlight kind of those discrepancies. And so just to show you how easy it is to dispute, also, all you have to do is select your POs, click dispute, and we sort of summarize everything. You can modify our descriptions. You can view the attachment that we auto attach and generate for you. And all you have to do is click submit, really. So this is kind of just a review screen. You can change it if you like. But that's all it takes to dispute OTIF fines with SupplyPike. And then you can track your disputes here. So yeah, it's hopefully a comprehensive tool that lets you understand why you're getting fines, as well as to dispute the invalid portion as well. The last thing I'll highlight here is on our analysis tab is where you can kind of break down your OTIF performance by these different sort of supply chain segments. So if you're a prepaid carrier and you want to do that comparison of performance by carrier, then we've got that kind of analysis automatically done for you where you can see the scores per carrier, the associated fines per carrier. You can even pull up scorecards that show performance over time from this one carrier. So you can see their scores over time, the fines you've received over time from that carrier, and even the POs that they delivered that were maybe not compliant. So talked about sort of sharing performance with these third parties. This makes it incredibly easy to see performance from each third party and share those gaps when possible. So, and you can do the same type of analysis with your by departments, by Walmart DCs, by your ship points, by each item that you ship, and even some customization as well. So detailed root causing within our OTIF solution. And lastly, I'll just briefly touch on SQEP, which I know wasn't a part of this webinar, but we have that same type of visibility for the SQEP program where you can see your fines you're receiving sort of broken down by defect type. And then you can see that PO level visibility of where you got SQEP compliance fines, so that it makes hopefully compliance a lot less difficult to manage. And everything we have is sort of backed with knowledge base articles, some in Supplier Wiki and some in other places to give you sort of every detail you would want about all of these compliance fines to understand, their requirements, what you can do to prevent, and even dispute them as well. So that is just a very quick elevator tour of our compliance solution. Of course, if, like Peter said, if you have any questions, please reach out. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Ryan. It's really helpful information there, and a great little product preview too. But yes, this is where we leave you. Thank you all for joining again, and stay tuned for our next one.